Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the 11th Annual Community Justice Academy. It is great to see everybody virtually, and I'm so grateful for everyone who was able to join us here today. We have a pretty cool presentation today as we're going to discuss kind of a homicide case from beginning to end, and discuss kind of the role that forensics can play in helping us aid and figure out how the best way to not only solve these cases but prosecute these cases and hold people accountable ultimately for violent crimes. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, welcome to the Community Justice Academy. It's great to see everybody. For those of you who were with us last week, welcome back. And you're also halfway home to a t-shirt. So please keep attending, and please continue to participate in our Community Justice Academy. We really do value the feedback that we get from everybody over the course of the next couple of weeks. And so the Community Justice Academy is designed to be a real discussion about issues that are involved in the criminal justice system. And we really want to provide an opportunity to give you an in-depth look of what goes on in the criminal justice system. And in particular, today, we're going to take a really close look at the development of a criminal case. And in this particular case, it's actually a triple homicide that occurred on the north side of Indianapolis some time ago. And just to kind of bring everything full circle here with us, in 2018, Harry Dunn, who's a detective on this case, and Salita Scott, who was a deputy prosecutor working with me on this case, we were actually trying this case during the middle of Community Justice Academy, and I was supposed to be giving a presentation to the Community Justice Academy, but I had to bail because this trial went 8 days. It was a very long trial, but ultimately we got an outcome that was very beneficial to the community. So it's only fitting now that we come back to the Community Justice Academy to talk about what happened during those 8 days and share with you the experiences that we have. And so with that, let's kick it off and let's get started. And I want to first of all introduce our panelists. And remember that these presentations are only as good as the questions that we are asked, and we will have question and answer at the end of this panel. And so we'd encourage you to type things into the chat, send it to Michael Leffler, or just put it directly into the chat, asking questions about what's going on. And we will attempt to answer as many questions as possible at the end of this presentation. We are very lucky today. We've got a very special guest joining us. He is a retired homicide detective. He's a third-generation homicide detective with the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department, and along with his wife, Michelle, is the catalyst behind the Him by Her Foundation. Harry felt a calling to leave his then successful corporate career to enter the family business of being a detective, believing that he could make a difference. A native of Indianapolis, Indiana, Dunn is committed to serving the community and improving the life paths of others. Harry Dunn is the current president and CEO and is executive director of the Him by Her Foundation in school located on the east side. We're going to talk about that at the end of the day, but they're doing fantastic work there. And Harry's going to tell you how he wanted to use his opportunity and experience as a homicide detective and bring that to help at-risk kids. It's really an important message and conversation. We're going to talk about that at the end of this. So please, everybody, give it up for my main man, Harry Dunn, who's joined us here today. Harry, you're looking as good as ever, man.
Well, hello. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here today. This is a very important topic, and I could not be more excited to be invited as a panelist, and I appreciate it very much.
Well, thank you, Harry. And Harry and I sat next to each other for 8 long days in trial, but joining us there is my current chief counsel, Salita Scott. She joined the Marion County Prosecutor's Office in 2014, and she most recently served as a major felony prosecutor in Criminal Court 6, where we actually tried this criminal case. She is currently my chief counsel, which means she is my attorney, and she's only got one client, but I don't always listen. So she has a difficult client to manage, me, but she has a responsibility of our agency's budget, human resource issues, public record requests, and many, many other duties. She is from Indianapolis. She's a graduate of IU School of Law, the IU McKinney School of Law. She's worked in the court system her entire life. She knows things inside out. Give it up for my chief counsel, my good friend, Salita Scott. Salita, you're on mute. We cannot hear you. Still cannot hear you. All right. Well, what would one of these, go ahead. Well, what would one of these presentations be without a technical issue? So I'm going to take it from here while we get Salita's volume situation figured out. And we are going to talk to you about a homicide that occurred at Somerset Bay. For those of you who don't know, this is essentially 79th and Keystone in that area is where this homicide occurred. It happened on July 16th of 2017, and 3 people very tragically lost their life. Detective Dunn, you were the assigned detective to this case. And before we kind of get into the facts of the case, can you just tell us, generally speaking, when you arrive on scene of a homicide case, what's your process in terms of arriving on scene? What are you looking to do? What types of evidence are you looking to collect? Walk us through and tell the audience your process when you arrive on the scene of a homicide.
Thank you. One of the first things that I do is to make sure that scene preservation is at the top of my priority list. And so I want to make sure that sometimes what others perceive as being your number one contaminant, which can be the responding officers on the scene, right? Kind of stepping all over everything in an attempt to make everybody safe and keep everybody protected. And in an attempt to actually secure the scene, you'll be amazed at how many pieces of evidence can walk right out of the room attached to their boots and more. And so I try to make sure that I observe the neighborhood that I'm driving into. I look for little signals that sometimes people will be amazed, I think, of how many times you'll see little flickering lights going off on people's bedroom windows, trying to give you a hint to come see them later and things like that. You pay attention to the crowd that's scattered around the yellow tape around a crime scene. To try to catch those little winks and those little nods to come see them later because they don't want to be made out on a particular crime scene. It's those little things are some of the first things that I wrap my mind around while en route to the scene. And then once I arrive, then I come into contact with my reporting officer, who I would normally keep close to me. And then after a search warrant has been written and signed, I begin to enter the crime scene.
And Harry, in particular on a case like this where you have, and unfortunately 3 people lost their life, you have a crime scene, there's a lot of different things going on. You can't do this alone. Can you explain to me kind of your role in terms of serving as quarterback with both the forensic service agency as well as other detectives and just the teamwork that goes into that preservation of the scene, collecting evidence, but also making sure that we're gathering all the information that's possible?
Absolutely. One of the greatest gifts IMPD was able to give me was the opportunity to work with a lot of great leaders. And those homicide detectives within the homicide division was just a group of fabulous leaders. When we get called out on a case, we all on that particular shift go out on that particular homicide. We go together. And so I'm fortunate enough to have a group of detectives. There's no more than maybe 3 to 4 people that will go out. When we're fortunate to have that many on that shift on that particular day. And then what's called the, how about we say the designated detective, the one that's been assigned that particular case, they take lead, right? And so I would lead the other detectives by delegating tasks for them to do. We call the crime lab and we call the coroner's office. I am a strong believer in allowing people to be experts in their areas. And with my partners, we would always identify what our strengths are, and I would delegate tasks based upon the strengths of my partners. And so, i.e., I would always keep in mind. I got a couple of partners in my mind that immediately pop up that are really IT savvy, great at tracking individuals digitally. I make sure that the tools that I have at my fingertips are prepared to be used upon being dispatched to a particular scene. And so it takes a collaborative effort. Our crime lab, I think I would put next to or up to any department in the nation. They make sure that that scene is preserved as best as possible, and in every bit of evidence that they could collect, they make the attempt to do so. I mean, it'd be sometimes small things as simple as with the crime lab as I can't find any shell casings. There are no shell casings around this scene, and you'll see the crime lab get out the metal detectors, go through the yard, right, and other things, and then find those shell casings. I mean, they go the extra mile. It's a collaborative effort. You have prosecutors at times when they're available will come out on scene to make sure from a legal perspective that those legalities are being covered and that for communication reasons that we're able to relay what's taking place accurately, but with the guidance of a legal mindset. It's really appreciative when everybody begins to wrap their minds around all that goes into a homicide investigation.
And here as we walk through this, and Salita's back, and just so everyone's aware, we are going to show some photographs. We're not going to show any gruesome photographs or any of the dead bodies or anything along those lines, but this is a pretty heavy topic. Before we go into the PowerPoint, and Salita, I think you're back with us. If you could kind of kick off the PowerPoint for us and start here with the first slide on the PowerPoint.
Absolutely.
And we can hear you now, so you sound good.
Great.
And so just so what everybody's looking at right here is most of the homicide cases start with a 911 call. And with this 911 call, you are looking at what was transcribed when the 911 call was made. You can hear, this is actually made from a next door neighbor. It said caller heard 5 shots, heard people yelling, heard additional shots. And then down there below, you can see 2 black male fled apartment and ran to Honda Accord. A 3rd black male was waiting in the vehicle in the driver's seat. And so that's what kind of kicked off this investigation. And that's the information that Detective Dunn is going to have when he arrives on scene. And when we arrive on scene, it looks like this. And this is the exterior of the apartment complex where these 3 homicides took place. And go ahead, Salita, walk us through this. And this actually happened on the upstairs to the left is where the homicide took place. That 911 call was actually made from where that door is closed on the right-hand side upstairs. The apartments who live, the residents of that apartment are the ones who made the 911 call. And go ahead, Salita. And there you can kind of see just an interior shot of the apartment and move here. And I want to stop it right here, Harry. As you can see, this is a layout of the apartment complex. You can see where the 3 different bodies are positioned. We have 2 bodies basically by the bottom of that screen. And then you have the 3rd body in that bedroom right there. Harry, can you talk a little bit about who created this diagram and what's the purpose of this diagram and how do you utilize this in your investigation?
Thank you. The crime lab not only helps produce diagrams like this, but they also shoot a video and they take photos as well. And it's obviously really helpful as you go through a case to be able to revisit the scene as it was when you first arrived. And these type of images helps out tremendously. It also helps out by identifying where shell casings are, whatever particular evidence, each number that you see on this particular drawing, it'll let you know where the shell cases were at, what other evidence may have been located. And so those things are really important when you're at 2 o'clock in the morning trying to relive the investigation. You want to remember it exactly how it was. So these images are extremely important.
Salita, if you go to our next slide, it is, and unfortunately, the motive in this particular case was robbery. And one of the things you can see there, one of the victims, unfortunately, was not shy about sharing the fact that he'd actually won an injury settlement. And right there, that was actually the screensaver on his computer, Harry. And that's actually in one of the victim's bedrooms is the amount on that check. And then Salita, moving along. This again is just another picture of the bedroom. And Harry, you mentioned the fact that we would mark shell casings with different pieces of evidence. For those of you who are watching online with us, you see that yellow cone with the number 7 right there. That is to mark and identify a piece of evidence. In this particular case, it is a shell casing. Harry, if you would, just what's a shell casing? What does that mean?
A shell casing with a firearm that is a semi-automatic firearm, even a fully automatic firearm will do the same, different than what we know to be a revolver. A revolver, a lot of times, I would refer to as like a cowboy Western gun, has a cylinder in the middle. It doesn't do the same thing that a semi-automatic weapon would do. A semi-automatic weapon will eject a shell casing out onto the floor, onto the ground, or whatever it comes on contact with. And so a lot of times people don't realize that those shell casings, the amount of fire that is within that firearm burns off a lot of great evidence, like DNA, for example, pretty much most of the time. But we still are able to get a lot of great information from just one small shell casing, and even be able to compare it to a weapon if it's ever found or recovered during the investigation. So things like shell casings is absolutely huge when it comes to trying to solve a homicide that was due to a gunshot wound.
And Slita, we're going to show one more picture of the bedroom, just kind of giving a better perspective of what was going on. And Slita, if you can take off the PowerPoint at this point in time, and we'll start talking to Detective Dunn now about his investigation. Detective, you know, when you're there on scene, we actually had a witness in this particular case who was kind of familiar with one of the individuals involved. And she was able to give you the name Sean. And she knew that Sean might have lived in the apartment complex or thought maybe lived in the area. And so you received that information. So, I mean, this is, and just kind of to give folks kind of the uphill battle that a detective has when they're on scene. It's early in the morning and you have a silver Honda Accord in the name Sean to work with, which isn't a ton of information. What's your next step in the process, or what do you try to do with really not a ton of information that you're gathering on scene?
Thank you. On this particular investigation, I can definitely talk about broadly with all of my homicide investigations. I try to do my best to work with what I have, and so do my partners. In this particular case, which is rare, there was a female inside that apartment, and she hid underneath the sheets while the murders were taking place. One of the suspects in this particular case has been charged and convicted, actually looked her right square in the eyes while she was lying on the bed. And so she got a very good look at his face, and which was important. Obviously, she was very young, extremely frightened, and not for sure whether she wanted to share any information at all. I mean, if we can all imagine that type of trauma that she was going through. But we also, it was important for me on the scene to learn that there was a Honda specifically that had a gold emblem on the back of the trunk. And so immediately I knew I had something to work with because it wasn't going to be that common within the city of Indianapolis. So I was happy to have received right up front some very key information, a possible witness with a possible suspect vehicle with a gold emblem that fled from the area, occupied in that car up to 4 times. And so that's the information that I had and had to work with. And I didn't sleep for a day and a half initially on this particular case.
And you were, and I guess one of the things that happened to help break open this case was you received news later that morning that a person by the name of Sean ended up going to the hospital with a graze wound, a grazed gunshot wound. And I don't think you were actually able to respond to that. I think another detective actually went to that scene because you were working trying to track down that Honda. But at least you had someone who was named Sean, and through the course of that investigation, that individual, Sean, determined that his mom actually lived in the apartment complex. So we were moving in the right direction. And we get information out of Sean. And Sean was not entirely truthful, was he?
No, he was not. Sean had stated that he had been robbed in a particular side of town. And something that has happened on scenes where it was a murder, sometimes an aggravated assault where a person's been shot. When you hear over the radio another dispatch location of another person being shot within so many minutes of your case, we always think first that it's a very likelihood that they may be related, right? Not always, but you still, you check it out, right? And we did, and we learned the information that was shared with the detective that went to the hospital. was not even close to being honest or the truth whatsoever. So, but we were fortunate enough, as you mentioned, to run the license plate of the family member, his mom, that arrived to the hospital, and we learned that that license plate came back to the address, to an address within that same apartment complex.
And the license plates are important here because not only did it link Sean to the apartment complex, but then Sean told you that after he got robbed, he went to his friend Devontae's house. And when you look for Devontae that lived, he said on the west side, it was 40th and Boulevard, essentially. And when you ran Devontae's license plate, you found out what kind of car did he have?
That was a Honda, right?
So things were starting to come together here a little bit for you. And just so people know, you now know about Devontae, and you're looking for a silver Honda Accord. You found a silver Honda Accord. You're now looking for Devontae. He's a suspect, though, in this case, and suspects have rights when you try to talk to them and when you attempt to talk to them. Walk me through that process. There's this Devontae out there. You know that his vehicle matches the description of the vehicle that was involved in this case. When you actually locate Devontae and you begin that process of wanting to talk to Devontae, what do you have to do before you can talk to Devontae? Do you have to read him his rights? What did he have an attorney present? How did that process work for you as you're trying to figure out what's going on with Devontae and what role he might have played in this case?
In this particular case, Devontae, we were fortunate enough to, as you saw at the beginning, one of the first slides, that's what we call a CAD report, C-A-D. That CAD report documents the time that the run came out. And I was able to time, given an approximation of what it would take to get from where Sean had told us he got shot at versus where the actual crime scene was on Keystone. We were fortunate enough to be able to find a camera that showed that vehicle speeding around the corner, fleeing from that scene right there near 40th and Boulevard. I arrived at the house. Devontae was not there, but his mom was, and it was not easy to get cooperation out of that particular family, but eventually we were able to gain some ground there. Whenever you're speaking to a suspect, one of the first things that you want to do and that you should do, and I must do, is read them their rights to remain silent, their constitutional rights, and make sure that they've been advised of that they're a juvenile. Then we have to have a parent's consent while reading the advice of rights form. And so that's another challenge for detectives, right? We want to make sure that the individuals that we're interviewing understands that they don't have to talk to us at all, right? And because it's extremely important. Some people, especially at a young age, don't even understand that these rights exist. So it's very important for us to read it to them. And so even when they're protected with an attorney, sometimes that's just known to young people based upon what they've heard off of television. But when you read the advice of rights, you're making sure that person understands the law and what rights they've been given. And then if they elect to talk, they have to sign off on that document, giving us the opportunity to have a full and complete interview.
So, in Detective Dunn, this is a conversation that we've had on many homicide cases, and really kind of one of the toughest things for a prosecutor and a detective to work out. We know very clearly that Devontae is involved in this case. We also know that he's the getaway driver and not the shooter because of the information the 911 call told us. But we want him to be forthcoming about other people involved. What does this look like? How do we handle it? And so we're kind of presented with the dilemma of, do we make a deal with Devontae to secure his cooperation, have him tell us the full and complete story of everything that took place? Or do we move forward on a prosecution with Devontae and say, hey, we can't make a deal on something like this because we have 3 people who lost their lives? And I know that's something that's tough for everybody to wrap their minds around. And so for those of you who are viewing this, it's important that everybody understand the concept of accomplice liability. You're in for a penny if you're in for a pound, in the sense that if you do anything to aid or assist someone when they are committing a crime, especially a murder, in this case, it was being the getaway driver, you are just as responsible as the person who pulled the trigger. And so we are in a position of looking at ourselves and saying, do we just move forward against Devontae, or do we try to leverage this information to try to build cases against who are the shooters. And in this case, we decided to work with Devontae and make an agreement with Devontae where he would give you a full statement of everything that took place. And after he did that, we had the names of some additional individuals. And one of those individuals, and I'm just going to use first names in this case, was a person by the name of Stanley. And so from there, after we made the agreement with Devontae, Stanley was our next person in line. And then we, had to go through the same process with Stanley. And Salita, I want to talk to you a little bit about Stanley and talk to me about the process of a proffer and a pre-offer and what that looks like and what you and Detective Dunn do prior to taking Stanley's statement. So if you would, Salita, walk me through the process of how do we get to Stanley. We want to take his statement. We want to work out some sort of agreement with Stanley. Tell me how that process works and tell me about the interplay between you and Detective Dunn as we're trying to figure this process out.
Sure. At the time, Stanley was represented by an attorney. So, there's conversations that are had between our office and then that attorney. When we sat and talked with Stanley, Detective Dunn reasoned that proffer basically allows him to tell us what happened. As long as he's not admitting to something new, we won't hold it against him, but it's his ability to give us all the information without holding back. Now, when Detective Dunn and I go into that meeting, there's things we already know. And so there's things we do not know. And so we're looking for, are you telling us the truth? And so you ask those open-ended questions to kind of find out, are you telling us the truth or are you not? So that helps us gauge. And so with Stanley, there was a lot of things that we knew, and there were some things that we did not know. Stanley provided a great deal of information. So Stanley took us to, how they traveled, which is something we didn't know. So we knew Stanley told us, hey, we started on the west side of Indianapolis, then we go to Somerset. After going to Somerset, we're in Lake Nora. We know that there's a 911 in Lake Nora. That's, we know that much. And then he's like, well, after that, we go to Target and our friend picks us up and they're in a red vehicle. So that's stuff that we did not know. Detective Dunn was able to get a video and we were able to verify that information. One of the other things that we did not know is, we get phone records and Stanley's given us everyone's phone numbers. So we know everybody who's involved and we know their phone numbers and how they're communicating. So that way we're able to get cell phone records and compare that information and look at the cell tower reports to see, are these two people in fact together? He is saying Martell was with them. Well, we have Martell's number. Were they really together? With the help of Detective Dunn, we were able to get those cell tower records and confirm what he said. We were able to look at the Target video and confirm what Stanley told us. And so those were helpful information that he gave through that proffer that we wouldn't otherwise have had.
And so we're throwing a lot of names out here. So I want to make sure everybody's on the same page. How many people are involved in this particular triple murder? How many people total?
We have 5.
Okay, so we have 5 people. We've already heard the name Sean, and we've heard the name Devontae. Devontae is the driver, the getaway driver. Just briefly describe Sean's role. You mentioned Martell. There's also Troy Ward and Stanley. Walk me through what Devontae and Stanley had kind of pieced together in terms of what happened that day.
Sure. What we knew was based on what they told us, Sean got everybody together. He's like, hey, I know Justin, he lives in my apartment. I want to hit a lick. So he wants to go rob them. He's like, there's money there. It's in a safe. There's drugs there. And so Devontae is picking up Sean. And then from there, they have their friend Stanley. And so Devontae, Stanley, and Sean are in a vehicle. They don't have guns. And so they call Martell, who they know has guns. And so they contact Martell. Martell also contacts his friend Troy, who is also known to have guns. So they believe they needed weapons just in case. And so those individuals were also involved.
And when they get to the apartment complex, what role does everybody play according to both Devontae and Stanley?
Sure. Devontae is the driver. He stays in the car. Stanley also stays in the car. Sean, Martell, and Troy, they go up to the house and enter into the house.
And I think one of the most important points here to recognize too is Stanley and Devontae give two independent statements from one another that are fairly consistent. But Stanley and Devontae are not friends. They don't know each other. In fact, the first day they met was this day. Talk to me about the relationship between Devontae and Stanley and what level of conversation they had.
They didn't have much conversation at all. The two of them, just inside the car, you know, there was conversations, but not too much in detail, a conversation that they had.
And so Stanley and Devontae don't really know each other, yet their stories are pretty consistent. And so once again, we have this dilemma. Do we make a deal with Stanley because he's provided us with pretty good information and helped us identify the three people that go into the house? Now, after probably some of the most critical evidence is after the crime, where do they go and what do they do? And Stanley gives us pretty specific information on where people go, but he also tells us people split up. And Devontae and Sean go their separate ways because Sean gets a graze wound. And so they go back to Devontae's house, and the other three guys are left in this wooded area. What are they doing in this area by Target? What's the purpose of going there? What are they trying to do? And what ends up happening?
Sure. When they go into that wooded area, they are trying to open that safe. So Troy has a gun. It's a 40 caliber Smith & Wesson, and he's firing at that safe to open it. And so that is their purpose for being back there, is to try to get the money. They were not able to open the safe. And so, you know, Sean and Devontae are leaving. There's an AR-15, sorry, that was taken from the house that Sean had and placed that in the trunk.
And so one of the things that's really important here is they're saying that they're in the woods firing shots, that there's a safe that they stole from the apartment that is now in the woods. And Stanley says they leave that safe there and then walk over to the Target right there at Nora, and then someone picks them up. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so Detective Dunn, you've just been provided with a ton of information, including the fact that shots have been fired in this area at a specific time. What do you as a detective, what information are you looking for trying to link all this together?
Well, I always operate with two systems. One is trust but verify. Got that from old Ronald Reagan, right? And then the Pythagorean theory, right? If A squared is equal to B squared is equal to C squared, then A and C squared have to be equal as well. And so I've been given this information. I'm like, okay, well, first, A squared is the information that I received from witnesses on the scene and the suspects that's been involved, that's been interviewed. But then we need to corroborate that, right? And so you then take what would become your evidence from the scenes, and which you can have multiple scenes, and being in the woods where the safe was at. This is about trusting, but yet verifying that Stanley's information that he shared, did it lead us to something that was fruitful? And sure enough, yes, the safe was there. Yes, it was told that shots were fired at that safe. Yes, the shell casings was there. And the shell casings matched the caliber that we were hoping that it would match. And so we are matching up and trusting yet what we were being told, but yet my responsibility is get out there and go verify it. And in turn, one box after another, we were checking each box and we were verifying this information that was shared with us. As Salita stated, there was a lot of information that we already knew prior to going into these interviews and receiving proffers and so forth. And so when you are able to say, hey, this witness over here said the same as the witness who was actually on scene, that's your A squared and your B squared. But then my investigation bears fruit that proves what they stated to me was accurate. So that's your C squared, which means obviously who they're talking about needs to be my primary suspects. And then we began to go after each individual, one after another, and with the attempts to interview each one of them. And we began to put the case together, and all the pieces to this particular puzzle began to come together in a way that was almost prepared to be presented to the prosecutor's office.
And when you talk about that trust but verify, and there's quite a bit of surveillance cameras in that area around the Target and the post office. Do you go to check in and see, hey, is this something that was potentially caught on film, or is there anything that we can do to verify what Stanley's telling us?
Absolutely. We were able to retrieve the video from that department store. We were able to locate them on film, being picked up in the same type of vehicle that was described to us. We were able to verify that information.
And so, Salita, if you will, if we can go back to the PowerPoint now. And remember, we start everything with basically a 911 call, and this is no different. So Detective Dunn, you're looking, is there shots fired in this area of Lake Nora? That's what people are telling you. And sure enough, right after this incident occurred, this homicide occurred shortly after 6 o'clock. And then at 6:30, we have a shots fired run at Lake Nora. It says black male, no shirt, black pants with black duffel bag, went into the woods. Time delay 2 minutes. Detective Dunn and his crew goes into the woods, and our next slide will show us a picture of. That's the wooded area from the apartment complex. That's where Detective Dunn looked, and lo and behold, what do they found right there? Detective Dunn, what are we looking at?
That is the door to the safe, right? And so obviously it's underneath water, but obviously that was what we would call a clue.
And so you locate that clue, trying to locate the safe. You found the safe, which again corroborates what Stanley's telling us. Next slide, please. There you can see some of the other things related to this case. Submerged, there's a yellow evidence cone there marking that. Once again, associated with the case you're investigating. Salita, keep going. And now we're on the surveillance footage. So Stanley tells us this is all happening around 6:30. You pull the surveillance footage from this post office and Target, which is right there, and you see 3 people, as Stanley told us, walking towards the Target. Is that correct, Detective Dunn?
That is correct.
And Salita, keep rolling for us. And this footage, and as you can see, one of the individuals does not have a shirt on, as the 911 caller stated. Keep going, Salita. And if you look into the left-hand corner, you can see a red vehicle that the individuals are getting into. And Stanley and Martell get into the vehicle, but they say Troy, the other individual, does not get into the car. And so let's go to the next slide, and we can see that car. Next slide. Oh, that car drove away, and only 2 of the 3 people get in, as Stanley told us. And Detective Dunn, you had previously mentioned looking for that Honda Accord on our city streets. And what are we looking at here, and how did this assist you in the investigation?
This is that Honda Accord. We have a couple of other shots where the gold emblem that's there on the back trunk was more clear to us. And then you can tell by the dust, even in the image that you're looking at right now, the rate of speed that they're driving, trying to get to their location, fleeing the scene. And so all of this was very valuable, and it also corroborated information that had been shared with us.
And Detective Dunn, you talked about the timeline, which is critically important. So this incident happened at basically 79th and Keystone. When we talk about Somerset, they go to Lake Nora immediately afterwards. They drop those folks off right before 6:30. And then at 6:44, we see them at 40th and Boulevard on this camera. And just so everyone's clear at home, this is an actual video camera, not we just took a still frame of it for ease of presentation. But we actually see that Honda Accord speeding off and going to Devontae's house, which is right there at 40th and Boulevard. Is that an accurate summary, Detective?
It is. Thank you.
All right. So we've got some pretty good corroboration here. And Slade, if we can go back to just us talking before we get into the cell phone records. And so Detective Dunn, we've got information from Stanley. He's given us everybody's cell phone information. And me as the prosecutor, the one thing I'm worried about is we need a link to who we believe are shooters. We need a link between what Stanley's saying and Martell. We have surveillance footage. We've generally been able to corroborate Stanley. We found the stuff in the woods, but we haven't necessarily corroborated him as it related to the identity of the people that he was with. We're still just taking his word on it. And so you asked him for cell phones. Who are you talking to? Well, let's look at your cell phone records. And so you're not just asking him to do this by memory. If you would just explain to our audience, when you're trying to get someone's cell phone records, what are you trying to accomplish? And then what is the process that you have to go about to get both their cell phone records and their cell tower records?
Yes, you need to write a search warrant, right? And you need to write a search warrant, and you need to stay within the scope of your investigation. Exploring through someone's phone is something that, believe it or not, is not allowed, right? And so if you want a search warrant turned down, then try to put something in there that's exploratory, right? And so we narrow our focus to stay within the timeframes of the investigation, and to make sure that whatever we're seeking within that cell phone is still within the scope of the investigation itself. So we won't go back 2 years unless our investigation somehow or another led us that way. But it requires a search warrant. You need a judge's signature on that. And once we receive that search warrant, we're able to send it out to the phone carrier, whether it be Sprint, T-Mobile, whoever the case may be. And we request and look for all of your outgoing calls, all your incoming calls. Are there any photos or images, screenshots, things like that, that we could deem to be important to our investigation. And our search warrants are drafted in a way that we do our best to make sure that we're not missing anything that electronically that can be within a handheld device like a cell phone. So because we can also write search warrants for other items besides cell phones. So in this particular case, it is really important to be able to see how many of them have their cell phones, because if you can take those cell phones and link them together and all of a sudden they're in the same car, traveling the same path according to the cell towers, then you can, it helps corroborate some of the statements that you get and sometimes get within an investigation. So learning their routes of travel, and knowing that the cell towers around the nation will always pick up your location, right? It's really important to make sure that you retrieve as much data off of that phone that the law will allow.
And so when we talk about this area, I've got my cell phone right here. And if I make a cell phone call, you talk about it hitting off a cell tower, does that help us better identify where people are located in the city when they make that call?
Absolutely. That's the closest cell tower to your cell phone will pick up your call. They will pick up that call that you're talking about, Prosecutor Ryan Mears, and that was first and last name, Prosecutor Ryan Mears. That was kind of cool. And so at the same time, absolutely. So it'll do sometimes what we call, we can ping the cell phone to learn where it's located at. There's other tools in our toolbox that we have, especially when we're working with strategic partners, that can get us even further detail and mapping of where a person's movement may or may not have been. And so that information is absolutely key in these type of investigations.
And so just to be clear in this one, Stanley's telling us he's got his cell phone and he's calling Martell, and Martell is using his cell phone while they are together. And so we want the cell tower data to make sure Stanley's telling us the truth. Is that basically the sum and substance of it?
That's it. Absolutely.
Okay, so Salita, before we go to the actual cell phone records, it was your job on this case to work with Stanley. So explain to us why we think the cell phone information is going to be helpful, and what are we hoping it's going to show as we gather all these cell tower records, which can help us locate where someone is making calls from. So are Stanley and Martell making calls? Who's calling one another? Walk me through how the cell phones are being used as these crimes are being committed.
Sure. One of the things that we noticed with the phone records was that Stanley and Martell, they're talking to one another, they're calling each other, they're texting. And then we also know that Stanley and Martell are also talking to Troy Ward. What is important for us is just to confirm everything that Stanley has said. We can't just say, okay, Stanley told us this, so we're fine, we're going to trial because Stanley told us this is what happened. So for us, it's important just to know that they traveled the route that he said, and we verify that that was correct and that was done. And so it also builds those relationships. We can see how long they've been talking to each other, how long they've been associating with each other. So it gives us a greater perspective.
And when we talk about Devontae and Sean and their cell phones, they were not necessarily using the traditional cell phone data. They were using like Facebook calls or relying on Wi-Fi calls. Does that show up on your phone records and your cell tower data, Salita?
No.
Yes. So these are just traditional phone calls pinging off or bouncing off the towers. And so, Salita, I know we got the PowerPoint here queued up. If you can walk us through what numbers we're looking at and what information we can glean from these cell tower records.
Sure. So the numbers that we're looking at, this is Stanley and Martell's phone number. He told us that they started off on the west side of Indianapolis. So
and can you tell us who's who?
Sure, the 219 number is Martell and Stanley is 871.
Okay, and in this opening shot here right now, and the time's a little difficult to see, but we're July 16th at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and we see a phone call placed. And what does this map tell you, if anything, about where these phones are located?
That is, they're in fact on the west side of town, as Stanley told us. They're not together at the time, but they are both on the west side.
And generally speaking, we're not trying to give away anybody's address. Are these locations consistent with where Stanley lived and where Martell lived?
Yes, it is.
Okay, go to the next slide now. And so on this second slide, we've moved the time up to about 5:26. And those towers look to be pretty similar to one another. Can you tell me about these phone calls and where these towers are located and why that was important to the case?
Yeah, this was over kind of close to the New Augusta area. We knew that Stanley and Martell came together. They were picking up Martell. So this shows what time, or approximately what time around that area, at least when they were making phone calls, where they are together. So that's the first time that we see on that day where they are together.
All right, let's go to our next call.
This next one shows us that, so the crime happened on Somerset Bay. So this shows that both phones were in that area. You can see that, the times are a little bit different based on what they were probably doing on their phone at that time, but we have them both together at Somerset around 6:01 p.m. that day.
And so before we move on here, if we can just go back to that slide real quick.
Sure.
So everybody, the Somerset Bay, that's where this incident took place. We have both Stanley and Martell's phone. It's 6:01 p.m. And those phones are hitting off the same tower at the same time, right next to Somerset Bay. And as the Detective Dunn told us, we would call that a clue. Is that correct, Salita?
Yes.
And so the 911 call on this case came out right around 6:01. So this literally puts them at the address where this crime took place right before the 911 call occurred. Go ahead, Salita.
Then right here we have where they're both at North Central, around the area of North Central High School. If you guys are familiar with that area, it's about 86th Street near Nora Plaza over there in that area.
And where is that in relationship to that wooded area that we saw?
That is in that same area as well.
Right. And so just so everybody's clear, before we got the cell tower record, Stanley is telling us, hey, we're at this spot by this trail and we're all calling people. And it'll be on my cell phone records. And it's in this little wooded area by an apartment complex right next to North Central. And the apartment complex backs up to the Nora target. And so when we get the cell tower records, sure enough, both Stanley and Martell are making phone calls after the homicides occur at 6:30. And they are placed right next to North Central High School, exactly where Stanley told us. And when we talked to Stanley, we didn't have any of these information, and it turned out he was correct.
That's just another view of those towers.
Okay.
And this is just to confirm that around that time where we see them over in that area at 6:30, 6:35, they're over in that area. We know right before that, a phone call came in from a witness who had heard the shots at 6:31. So we were able to confirm they were in that area around that time, along with the videos.
Perfect.
Here we're seeing them, they're leaving from the area. And so you're able to see them traveling and leaving away from the area, which is consistent with them getting into that red car and then leaving the area. And at this point, they're still traveling together. And this is at the point where they start to, everybody's going back to their homes. And so they're dropping off Martell. And then you see that both Stanley and Martell are back to their original locations.
All by 7:30 that night.
Yes.
All right, Slade, if you can take us off the PowerPoint, thank you. And so we've got a pretty good case because we have the cooperation of Stanley and Devontae. We have the evidence that corroborates Stanley. We have evidence that corroborates Devontae, and the cell phone records put Martell pretty much at the scene when this homicide occurs. But we are relying on the cooperation of an individual to testify, Salida. And last week we talked about this topic of voir dire. And one of the issues that you want to talk about before you go to trial when it relates to voir dire is, how's the jury going to feel about the fact that someone very clearly participated in a murder? Although they didn't pull the trigger, they were certainly involved. They had every intention of participating in a robbery, which doesn't mean make people love anybody. What conversations do you have with the jury in voir dire to get them ready for what they're about to experience? And also, what are you looking for in terms of jurors' responsives, in terms of what would it take for them to believe someone who received consideration for their testimony?
Sure, we talked about several things. Accomplice liability, as you spoke about a little bit earlier, just getting the jurors to understand that regardless of, their individual role, they all played a role and are responsible to that. Then talking about, which is, something that we all have to consider, is having someone who has been involved in a crime testify. And so it's asking those jurors, like, how do you feel about that? And a lot of times it's giving examples of that, hypotheticals that are totally different from that situation, and asking, well, how do you feel about that? What type of information are you looking for? Are you going to believe just that person alone? Or are you more confident knowing that there's something else that backs up what they're saying? And there's additional evidence that's going to support that. So how does that make you feel? And it's an interesting conversation, a good conversation to have. And ultimately it's about, do the jurors understand those concepts? Are they comfortable with those concepts? Do they understand it? Is what we're looking for, is people to understand those different types of concepts.
And just so everybody knows, this is not a complete presentation of the evidence that we had in this particular case. But as I mentioned, this was a 7-day jury trial. Most jury trials last 2 or 3 days. This one lasted nearly 2 weeks. And so there was a ton of evidence. There's a lot of different things going on. And at the end of this case, we were able to convict everybody involved. And Troy Ward and Martell both received pretty significant sentences. Troy's case was based on other evidence that we didn't really get into today, but we were able to bring justice to those families. But Detective Dunn, I know in talking to you, one of the challenges that you faced as a homicide detective was just this idea of working on things on the back end after something bad had happened. You're trying to help pick up the pieces, which is certainly vital work, things that we need. But you've kind of gone a different direction, and you're kind of trying to work with people on the front end. Can you just kind of tell us about your evolution, your career evolution as a homicide detective, and where you are now and what you're hoping to achieve?
Sure, thank you very much. I recall working as a homicide detective. My deputy chief put out an email that said, "Hey, we need to find different ways to fight crime and different ways to fight these homicides," and had a bunch of detectives submit ideas. And the Him by Her Foundation was my idea that I submitted. I said, and Him by Her stands for Helping Improve Mankind by Healing Every Race. And it's an all, at the time, it was an all-inclusive program. We did not have a school building at the time. I remember launching in 2014 and this initiative and said to the community, you deserve to have a school with wraparound services. And I'm gonna do whatever I can to assist in that. And not shortly thereafter, Jim Irsay from the Indianapolis Colts donated $100,000 to us. And we launched our initiative. It was we knew it was going to take about 5 to 6 years to saturate the city with the concept of a school with wraparound services. But here we are in year 6. We were able to purchase the old Forest Manor Middle School. That's currently where Him by Her Collegiate School for the Arts is located. We're open until 10 p.m. Monday through Sunday. And so we believe it's very important. It's vital to keep young minds busy, occupied, while supplying them with information that could be the tools for success for their lives. And so it's another way, it's a preventative mode, I believe, of getting kids at a young age rather, and raising them up, but acknowledging that if you have that second grader, please understand that she may have an older brother, an older sister that also needs our help, a mom and dad who could use our help as well most of the time. And so we have put a lot of resources all within underneath one roof here. We're currently at 4501 East 32nd Street. We currently have an anger management boxing program inside the building. Take it out in the rings, take it out in the streets. It's sponsored by 4 former heavyweight champions of the world. And we have a full workout gymnasium here that is free to our young scholars as well as their family members. We have a 6-court basketball gymnasium, 2 football fields, and a baseball diamond. It's a 200,000 square foot building. And inside this building was a swimming pool that was closed in the year 2000. And we've just raised enough funds to remodel that pool and get it back open for the community. It will be open to the community. And so it's very, very important for us to try to get in front of these homicides. It's hard to measure how many lives you saved. It's a lot easier to measure how many you lost. But we have to stay engaged in the fight. We have to keep up these strategic relationships, like with the prosecutor's office, who has been just a tremendous strategic partner for the communities in the city of Indianapolis of trying to combat issues that we believe in very strongly here at Him by Her, like getting your driver's license back, which is really important to this community, trying to assist with your criminal history, and as far as getting certain charges expunged that qualify. The amount of support that's coming out of the prosecutor's office to these marginalized communities, I think is noteworthy and needs to be said. And we thank you, Ryan and Salita, for all the hard work that you're all doing for our communities.
And Harry, I really appreciate the kind words. And for anybody who has not been over there, this school is incredible, and what they offer to the community is amazing. We did the prosecutor's office basketball camp at Harry's school. They do a phenomenal job. I had a chance to visit, and it's just really inspiring to see the work that they're doing. And I think one of the reasons it's so successful is just how compassionate Harry is to everybody involved. And one of the reasons you were a great homicide detective, Harry, is you were able to establish that relationship and that rapport with the victims' families. And, I think it's important anytime that we talk about a homicide case to talk about the loss that those families experienced. If you would, just kind of talk about your relationship with those families and what those families have to go through, not only through the investigative process, but the trial process, and what role someone like you can really help the families who are going through a really, really difficult time when we talk about these homicide cases.
One of the first things that a mom and dad wants people to understand is that you cannot tell them that you understand how they feel, right? And you could be a family that is talking, you could be another victim to a homicide and say, hey, I lost my child. I know exactly how you feel. that's one of the first things you don't want to say, right? Because to every mom, that's their baby, no matter what their age is. You can be 54 years old and you're still mama's baby, right? And it's about speaking to them where they're at, right? I'm not trying to come and tell you that I'm going to heal all of your wounds, but I can tell you that you got a good warrior, you got a good team of warriors that are going to fight on your behalf. But we need your support, and we need you to stay focused, and because we have to get through this case. And a lot of times I always tell them some of the best detectives are the family members, right? They can bring you a slew of different what I call intel, right? It's not necessarily that it's factual, because Detective Dunn will take gossip. Give me the gossip, I'll take it, I'll work my way through it. But give me what the streets are saying, give me what people are out there in the community are saying, and the families love to be brought into the investigation. They take ownership into that investigation, because not only is it the loss of their loved one, but yet you've given them an opportunity to feel somewhat deputized. It's not the case, but they feel empowered, right? To begin to cooperate with the investigation. And it's huge at getting buy-in from families that are going through such trauma. It's really, really difficult, but you have to help them along the way to get through this. And I find that to be really important. It was a major part of the success that I had with my cases, was getting the families buy-in and cooperation all the way through, and making sure they understand there's not always a quick fix. It's not always a quick arrest. I need you to hang in this investigation for the long run.
And Salita, for us as prosecutors, as we work through these cases, some of the most difficult conversations that we have during the pendency of a case is with those families, and explaining to them the process and everything that they're going to need to go through. I think this case was particularly trying because it was so senseless and so dumb. Just seeing people lose their life over. And so, just so everybody's clear, they didn't get anything out of that safe. What they were looking for was not there. And so, that human cost over a mistaken belief is just so incredible in this case. And the victims in this case are just so young. Salita, talk to me a little bit about, just from the prosecutor perspective, that relationship with the victim's family. And then also, at the end of this case, I hate to call it a happy ending, but we were able to secure convictions of everybody involved. And I know that brought some sense of relief to the family. Talk to me a little bit about that relationship between prosecutor family and then also getting those guilty verdicts.
It's a very important relationship to have. We have great advocates who help facilitate a lot of our conversations. We have wonderful advocates that, when we first get a case, we're meeting with the family and taking them through that process and explaining this is something that is going to be long term. It takes a year or two sometimes to get to the final result. There are many pre-trials that are going to happen, and just explaining, like, you don't have to attend all of this. And, you may want, a lot of families want all the information and they want to see all the evidence that we have. And just explaining how we have to protect the integrity of our case and can't show them those things and can't tell them all those things, but also building trust with them and saying, hey, you may hear something on Facebook. You may get a text message, check with us and let us know, and we can tell you if something is true or not. There are a lot of things that happen that are said that aren't true. And so it's building those relationships, having those open conversations throughout the whole time. So that is something that is very important, managing those expectations and being there. And our advocates do a great job of being there for them, and talking to them and having great relationships, as well as our prosecutors.
And just so everybody who's out there, I think the reason you get into public service, the reason you become a prosecutor, you become a homicide detective, is you want to help people and you want to make a difference in people who are going through a really difficult and challenging time. And it's a pretty cool opportunity to be able to stand up for people who cannot stand up for themselves and bring justice to these families. And I know for me, some of the most long-lasting and meaningful relationships I have are with some of my victim families. Just because you go through this incredible experience that's gut-wrenching at times, but can also be satisfactory at the end, really brings you close together to other people. And as Detective Ben said, you're never going to understand what they're going through, but you hope that you play some small role in their healing process. because these families are hurting and struggling, and hopefully at the end of the day when you get a sentence, that helps the family. We had a couple questions about the sentence. Martell Williams received a sentence of 145 years, and Troy Ward received a sentence of 180 years at the Indiana Department of Corrections. So there's some pretty significant sentences here. Obviously, 3 people lost their lives. It was a really tragic case all the way around. But we could not have done it without Detective Dunn. And Detective Dunn, there's a number of questions for you. The first one is, how do you get information from Facebook? How do you get information from the cell phone companies? What is the secret to your success in terms of getting that information? And then when they give you that information, what does it look like? How is it packaged and how is it sent to you?
That's not loaded. So let me try to answer that question as best as I'm able. I can tell you I was fortunate enough to be born into a family of law enforcement officers. And my dad was a police officer who was shot on the same department. He was shot and paralyzed in 1977. He was a quadriplegic Wabash graduate. My grandfather, who's also was Harry Dunn Sr., was on the department. He was a homicide detective, and he was the only homicide detective who solved 100% of his homicides for 32 years. So I had big shoes to fill, but they were huge at telling me to make sure that I was able to do all the things that I wanted to do in life before I became a police officer, because they wanted to make sure that it was something that I wanted to do and not because it was something that they have done in life. And so when I came on board of the department, there was already sort of a way paved for me in the community. My family's name was known throughout the community as being a police officer that they could talk to. Right, because my grandfather and my dad told me that you should be able to communicate with absolutely anyone. It makes no difference what race they are, what color, creed, religion they are. You should be able to talk to absolutely anybody, and to make sure that you know how to decrease to allow other people to increase. And so when I would speak with individuals, I would speak to them like they were human beings, even if I knew that they were responsible for murder. Right. And so I would speak with them and treat them with the respect that they deserve to be spoken with. And it was hugely helpful in my investigations of simply treating people like a human being, even though you're holding back other emotions that makes you want to speak differently to them. And so it was important. Along the way with answering the questions with social media and recovering information, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, which Snapchat was used in this particular case, along with those type of social media platforms, police officers have the opportunity to write a search warrant for your page, and to actually preserve that page so you can't delete it. You might think that you've deleted it, but we still have abilities to access it, and they can be incredibly helpful as far as additional information, additional clues, nothing that we would always say leads you to something concrete and it's just absolutely factual because you viewed it online on their Facebook page and it's a video and the video tells all the stories, which is not always entirely true. It takes a lot of cooperative evidence to compile a case together, especially when it's circumstantial. In this particular case, I was fortunate enough to have witnesses and to have evidence that I could present to the prosecutor that led to these charges being filed. The prosecution of a case using social media and so forth, it's really important for us to make sure we're supplying the prosecutor with as much information as possible, giving them the tools to be successful in these cases. So when I would put a case together and present it to the prosecutor's office, one of the reasons I was successful is because I was humble enough to say, okay, I'll go back out there and I'll try again, Ryan, because Ryan and Salita will send you back out into the field to go get more evidence. This is not enough. And it's that type of push for excellence that helps build great detectives. And it's that type of fight for people in our communities that I think more need to know about the prosecutor's office, saying, hey, no, we're not, because you don't have to, for a homicide detective or police officer, we're used to the words probable cause, right? Prosecutor's office doesn't operate off of solely just a probable cause. You got to go in that court and prove it beyond reasonable doubt. And that's a much higher bar, much higher standard. And so on this particular case, they brought out Brian Mears to try this case, right? And Ryan and Salita were absolutely all stars, and so it's fantastic to have strategic partners in our communities that are ready to take on these challenges. Social media is a huge tool, but the relationships built with the prosecutor's office and the police department and in the community is equally as important, if not more important.
And Detective Dunn, you said something in there that I just want to highlight for everybody out there, for those of you who may have kids, grandkids, or might be active social media users yourself. Just because you think you deleted it did not mean you deleted it. And so when Detective Dunn serves a search warrant on Facebook or Instagram or TikTok or Snapchat, whatever it is, we get everything. And the things that you think you have deleted, we get. And so, you know, it works just as if you were searching someone's house. We send a search warrant to Facebook or Instagram. They send us everything that you've ever posted or written on someone else's page. It's a lot of stuff to go through, but it's a treasure trove of information. And so it's just something that we are utilizing more and more. And one of the things, you know, when I talk to different people's classes and we talk about this issue of the right to privacy and search warrants and what does that look like. You know, when they wrote the Constitution, they were thinking about people's bedrooms. You know, we don't want the government coming into your bedroom. But I would tell you today, I think if I asked the 93 people that are on this call right now, would you rather have the police search your bedroom or your cell phone? Pretty close to 93 people would say, go ahead and search my bedroom. You're not getting into my cell phone. And it just goes to demonstrate how times have changed. And so for us as prosecutors with homicide detectives, when we have access to someone's cell phone, which we frequently and routinely do, we get a lot of information about what that person's thinking about, where that person has been. Because remember, your cell phone, if we have your cell phone, is basically a GPS device that you have attached to yourself. And even if you're not making necessarily as many calls, there's still GPS data potentially on your phone, which we can use to help really try to figure out what was going on. And so they are invaluable tools to prosecuting crimes in Marion County in the present day. And so it's difficult to overstate the importance that type of evidence is. But as Detective Dunn just stated, at the end of the day, this is a relationship business. You know, we still need people to come forward with information. We still need victims to be cooperative. And cell phone technology is a tool. It's a very important tool, but it's not the most important tool. It's those relationships that we have in the community. Detective Dunn, you do a great job with those relationships in the community. And I know you mentioned the wraparound services at your school. In particular, can you tell us a little bit about where you are with enrollment and the progress that you've seen over the last 2 years? Now is a really trying time to run and operate a school with the pandemic and everything else going on. How's the school doing, and what can we do to help out?
Well, thank you very much for asking. Inside this school, we're currently able to offer. We do STD testing, HIV testing, youth counseling, family counseling, lead testing, free dental work. We offer an anger management boxing program, which I spoke about earlier. We have a CNA class, a phlebotomy class. We have a nursing school inside the building. We currently have 2 clinics that are fighting to get into space in this building, which we think is fabulous. That'll be open to the community. We also have a specialist that's a doctor that is doing free colonoscopy exams. And so we're trying to get people to understand how important it is to get in front of some of these illnesses that's plaguing these marginalized communities. And you're getting it all underneath one roof. We are at himbyherschool.org. For more information. Historically, if you would like to know more about the foundation as a whole, it's himbyherfoundation.com, himbyherfoundation.com. And we started off in the middle of a pandemic that was never part of our plan or design. We started off with a very small student population. We only had 60 students in the building. We tripled our enrollment this year, still within this pandemic. And so we're super excited the progress that we have made. In 1 year, we have reached over 600,000 people in the city of Indianapolis. That's 600,000 people through our social media platforms. And so we think that that's a tremendous help towards the enrollment that we was able to triple in a couple of months after the school ended. But we're doing great. And so, but we could do a whole lot better with more community support. So obviously we are still taking donations and still asking for volunteers. But we're asking for everyone to enroll their young scholars in the school. We're currently kindergarten through 6th grade. We do have a pre-K inside the building as well, trying to give parents the options of dropping off all of their kids at one location, so that pickup drop off is easier for parents when they have that ability to do so. And so please share with others the importance to enroll in schools like this. We have a curriculum that we created ourselves. It's a culturally responsive curriculum. Our teachers are trained in cultural responsive training. That basically, we teach kids where they're at, and then we lift them up. We have to first get them to get the buy-in from the students, get their attention in order to feed them with the information that they deserve to be fed. And it's working. We just got finished with our testing this week, our internal testing, and we showed that the populations of students that we had last year, grades went up. All of them passed the test. With our new students that have enrolled so far, we're at 90%. Passing the grade is called a WNAA testing, so it's more of an internal testing than state standardized testing. But we know that we have an uphill battle in this community. Only 12.7% of third and fourth graders in the city of Indianapolis passed the state exam last year. 12%. So are we going to be satisfied with knowing that 88% of our students are not passing or making the grade? I think not. And so we believe in getting involved, getting engaged, not standing on the sidelines and complaining about it, but getting involved and being part of the solution. And so we're doing our best here. We have an amazing educational staff here. And I believe in experts being experts in their areas. So I don't try to pretend to be the educator in the building. We hire great educators that help coach me along the way. I'm good at leading on multiple fronts, and I try to bring those skill sets to this building. Prior to becoming a homicide detective, I was in the private sector. I built 17 $30 million stores for Lowe's Home Improvement. I was human resource manager for Home Depot. I've worked an area manager for Nordstrom's. I've done a lot prior to coming onto the police department. I was the director of Lafayette Square Mall, assistant director of Keystone at Keystone at the Crossing Mall, as well as Circle Center Mall. And so I've had a lot of private sector business history. I've owned my own banquet and catering service and catered over 300 weddings in the city, which helped me as well as a homicide detective, because a lot of these people's like, hey, I know you, hey, you threw my wedding, right? And so things like that helps out a lot when it comes to relationship building and working within the community. But we're trying to fight these homicides by educating individuals and teaching them a more excellent way of living life. So please share. We also, by the way, offer vocational training. We certify you in plumbing, heating and cooling, electrician and more, and general contraction and more. So we are trying to get individuals to limit some of their excuses, but yet give them an opportunity to do better in life. And so we're working really hard at it. By the way, every first Saturday of the month, you can come to the school. We feed families from all around the city. We average about 600 families a month. And please share that every first Saturday of the month, feel free to come by and get enough food to last you for a week. And we partner with iTown Church on that mission. So things are going really well from many different perspectives, but we still have an uphill battle to make it through this pandemic.
And I was at the first Friday in September. The food is incredible. The conversation's incredible. It's really a great place to visit. Harry, you've had many jobs. You've been good at all of them. We are grateful for your service to our community and all the different aspects that you've had. And we appreciate you sharing some time with us here today. Salita, I'll get you out of here on this. Any final words or thoughts on this case and anything you'd like to share with the group before I preview next week?
No, I thank you all for your time and your feedback and your comments that you're putting in the comment section. We look forward to seeing you next week.
Well, next week is October 20th, which is the topic is going to be the intersection of homelessness and the criminal justice system. And our panelist is going to be Marion County Magistrate and former Deputy Prosecutor Joel Snyder. We now have to call him Judge. Marion County Public Defender Agency Supervisor Mitch Swiderski, and the Street Manager at Horizon House, Nicole Westling. They're going to give you hopefully an informative conversation about the topic of homelessness and how that interacts with the criminal justice system, and maybe what are some out-of-the-box solutions that we can do to help make Marion County a more equitable place. I really personally enjoyed the conversation. Anytime I get to hang out with my good friend Harry Dunn, I'm feeling pretty good about life. It was a fantastic conversation. To everybody on here, you're halfway home to a free t-shirt. 2 more weeks, you get your free t-shirt. Michael Leffler has promised me they will be here on time, and we can't wait to pass those out. Salita, thank you for all your help and assistance. Harry, love seeing you, man. Keep up the great work over there on the east side. And to everybody who joined us, thank you. There's a lot of things you could be doing right now. We love the conversation that we've had with you. And if you ever need anything from the prosecutor's office, you know how to reach us. And with that, I will see you next Wednesday, October 20th, to talk about homelessness. Thanks, everybody.